All right, guys, let's talk about John Deaton's big announcement. First of all, let's make clear he had three big announcements. Only the first one really pertains to crypto and what we're interested in. The other two are about his own life and his book. While those are interesting, I'm not going to talk about those because that isn't about crypto. If you're interested in his announcement, you can check out John Deaton's Twitter, and he has that on his Twitter. The other thing is be careful about fake John Deaton accounts because there's several of them out there. Go to the real John Deaton one. That's the one that's going to have his big announcement. So what was the big announcement? It was about corruption and this guy called Steve Navarro. And he was one of the early pioneers in Bitcoin and crypto and in several other platforms. Then the government sued him and threatened him with a lot of prison, but he wanted his day in court. And then the government dropped the case, with prejudice, by the way, which means they can't sue him for the same reason again. Now, why would the government do that? Usually, sometimes it's because they want to go after bigger fish, or sometimes it's because they want to protect a specific client. But in this case, neither of those two conditions are met. So why did they drop the case with prejudice? Probably because they didn't actually have a case, and they didn't want to fight and be embarrassed in court. And they tried to make several deals with him before they dropped the case with prejudice because they didn't actually have a case. They basically said more or less that, hey, if you give us dirt on some of these people, like Caitlin Long, like Cynthia Loomis, a lot of these big people, then maybe we can go lighter on the sentence or we won't prosecute you. But he stood firm and he said no. And the government was all big and threatening until they completely dropped the case because, like I said, they didn't have a case. So he was being prosecuted, hoping that he would squeal out some of these early crypto people or big crypto people. Now, I think this did actually happen under William Hinman and the last administration because all the other evidence that's actually related to this actually happened around the 2016, 2017, maybe even 2015 era. Gary Gensler, his guilty part is hiding all of this. It didn't actually happen under his watch, but he did actually try to hide all of this and increase the SEC's power, being built on some of these lies that have actually were created during the last administration. So that's his guilty part in all of this. But the key figures around what this is actually Jay Clayton and William Hinman. So what actually happened? We don't really know. Deaton has been talking with this guy and he's seen some of the receipts. Now, there's attorney-client privilege to a lot of the stuff that Deaton was shown, so he can't actually spill the beans there. So that is something that we'll kind of have to guess at. But from what he said is he's seen some of the receipts. And if the Brad Garlinghouse, Chris Larson case actually goes on, there's going to be a lot of cross-examination of Bill Hinman. And Deaton himself has actually offered to come in for free to cross-examine old Billy. And there's going to be a lot of explaining to do by Bill Hinman, which I don't think he can actually explain away. I don't think Gary Gensler or the current SEC really wants this to happen. Hester Pierce might want it to happen. She's not involved in this. But she also disagrees heavily with a lot of the SEC's decisions, so she might welcome it. But Gensler and the SEC does not want this to happen, so they might actually drop the Brad Garlinghouse, Chris Larson case. But if they actually drop that case, that would almost be an admission of guilt to everyone else, and they would actually lose a lot of that fear factor they have against the other cases. And maybe it'll actually get brought up again in a future case. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place if what John Deaton is insinuating is true. He also insinuated that the Steve Navarro guy actually was critical in certain early platforms. Now, he didn't say which platforms they are, but it's heavily implied it is Ethereum. And of course, we've all had speculations of Joseph Lubin and everyone wrapped in this. Of course, John Deaton couldn't give the details, and he might be exaggerating a little bit, obviously, to his, Steve Navarro's favor. I'm not really sure. I can't really say onto that, but this does actually look to be a big deal if everything about this is actually true. So there is going to be a cross-examination of William Hinman and maybe even Jay Clayton as this drags on. And the thing is, like, there might be more than one former SEC official or one former SEC director that actually might be having some penalties or might even be going to jail. Because if a lot of these accusations are as serious as they make them out to be, I'm not really sure if there's a way they can actually kind of like evade that, or they can avoid that. So that's something we'll have to see as well. This is all getting very, very interesting, and it's getting very serious for the SEC. They've already lost a lot of credibility in their current lawsuits. Binance and Coinbase are both asking the courts to actually dismiss the lawsuits. And looking at the predisposition of the judges and how they've actually ruled, they're actually very likely to grant one of those positions, which would destroy the SEC's position that all cryptos, even on the secondary market, are securities. And the SEC may not even get their intellectual appeal in the Ripple case as well, and that would kind of destroy their kind of standing ground for the Binance and Coinbase case. Now you throw this on top of it. If they choose to pursue the Brad Garlinghouse and Chris Larson's case, which by the way could actually be worth billions of dollars to the SEC, they might actually have to stand ground and watch one of their own get examined, or someone that was one of their own get examined, and that might bring the SEC's actions in the previous administration into question, which would actually undermine all of Gary Gensler's arguments and expose the SEC's corruption under both the Biden administration and the Trump administration before it. Of course, it would expose Gary Gensler and his logic behind everything, but it would also expose William Hinman and Jay Clayton as well, because Clayton was the director under the last administration, and he was the guy that a lot of this corruption actually happened under. Also, let's not forget, he did go to work for an Ethereum affiliated firm right after his tenure was up, and he was replaced by Gary Gensler. And let's not forget, the SEC kind of changed its tone on the status of cryptocurrencies suddenly at the end of 2021 or around 2022, where they said like everything is a security, after saying in 2021 that there was no real legal framework for cryptocurrencies. Why the entire change of pace? Maybe there was some Ethereum line pulling. Maybe there was like Goldman Sachs telling them to do that. We don't really know why, but there was definitely an influence that caused them to actually change their tone. And throughout all of this, they've maintained that Bitcoin and Ethereum are not securities, or haven't really gone after them. Bitcoin, I can definitely understand. You can't really go after Satoshi Nakamoto. You don't really know who he is. And he's probably dead. I mean, he's probably Hal Finney. And if he is, he's probably dead, so there's nothing to go after. Ethereum has always kind of been the tricky one. And it's always been a weird kind of dance as to why they haven't gone after Ethereum. And that's why everyone's guessing there's corruption between William Hinman and co. and a lot of other people in the SEC during that period of about 2016 to 2017, 2018, when he actually made the speech. The speech is going to be of paramount importance. And of course, a lot of the receipts are actually going to come to light. And a lot of the people, like I said, that were involved with the Steve Navarro, that he actually helped found the platforms, actually distanced themselves from the platform and try to trivialize his contributions to their project. The project is heavily implied to be Ethereum. But if those receipts come out, I think we will actually see those people might actually be lying. So this actually might be pretty bad for Ethereum, because obviously Ethereum might be the one that these government officials are trying to protect. And you'll see a lot of the corruption between Joe Lubin, maybe even Vitalik Buterin, William Hinman, and Jay Clayton. Jay Clayton and William Hinman, being government officials, they could be found to have abused their position, and they could actually be headed to jail. Vitalik might be kind of exiled to Planet Xenu. And I don't really know about Joseph Lubin. There could be a lot of heavy fines. And, imagine like everyone in the industry suing Consensus because Consensus was in cahoots to actually screw everyone else. Now, I actually don't believe that. I do actually think Lubin and Consensus basically just lobbied the SEC to say that they weren't, to actually say like, they actually weren't a security, and then like just let everyone else fend for themselves because they didn't really care about the rest of the industry. I don't think they actually directed the SEC to attack Ripple or any of the other companies, because they don't really need to. As long as they were the only ones with regulatory clarity, they would actually have a step up. And the thing is, like, Ripple and Ethereum really aren't that competitive because Ethereum is mainly a smart contract platform, and Ripple actually gave up their smart contracts a long time ago, so they don't really operate in the same space. Ethereum's competitors are much more like Cardano, Solana, etc. Other platforms that actually do have a smart contract platform that are actually in the DeFi space, in which XRP is not one of them because they don't really have the features. XRP has always focused on like cross-border remittance, and Ethereum's really never done that. Now the stable coins are kind of a newer thing, and they're focusing on them now, but not during that time period. But if there was a lot of corruption, if they did pay off the SEC, if they did pay off Jay Clayton, they did pay off William Hinton, and maybe later on they paid off Gary Gensler, that will be revealed, and that would strike the SEC down in a lot of these lawsuits. And make them lose a lot of credibility. And I think with that knowledge, the judge would definitely rule against the SEC in this court case they have now. So they might actually just like drop the case against Brad Garlinghouse and Chris Larson if that's actually come out. Now, a lot of these big boom events have been much less than we've expected. So it might not actually be as bad. Like when the Hinman emails came out, like, yes, they did show some good like nooks and crannies, but it wasn't like a killer for the case itself. So this actually might be that. Like it could be bad for the SEC, but it may not be devastating, especially if their lawyers can keep some of that information redacted, which I'm not really sure if they can do or not. So that was basically John Deaton's big announcement. He didn't name any platforms, but it's heavily implied that Ethereum might actually suffer a lot of trouble. And it was also heavily implied that certain SEC officials might just go to jail. I hope the going to jail part is true. I don't actually think Ethereum's in really any trouble. I don't think it would actually be taken down or anything. I still think it's going to be the second biggest crypto out there for the foreseeable future. Maybe Vitalik and Joe Lubin get fined some. That's probably it. But I'm more interested in them actually taking the old SEC officials down and them discrediting the SEC as a whole. So that's the news for today. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe. Hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.